It happened in the post office line, of all places. The air smelled faintly of paper dust and those little self-inking stamp pads. I'd only been standing there a few minutes when a woman behind me leaned in just enough for me to catch her perfume lavender with too much powder and said, almost conspiratorially, "You'd look 10 years younger if you just fixed that crown." If you're a woman over 60 and your crown has been falling flat no matter what you try, you'll know exactly why my stomach dropped in that moment. I wish I could say I laughed it off. Instead, I froze, eyes locked on the wall of P.O. boxes, wondering if everyone else had heard. It wasn't the cut. It was the confrontation I didn't expect. Now, my crown had been looking a little, well, flat. I'd blamed it on the rain, or the cheap drugstore mousse I'd grabbed in a hurry. But the truth is, when you're over 60, a flat crown isn't just hair misbehaving. It can feel like you're fading into the background. And that awkward comment in the post office? It planted a question I couldn't stop thinking about. That moment made me start paying attention. Not to products, not to teasing combs or miracle sprays, but to something no one had ever explained to me. How the right cut can give you lift without a single puff of hairspray. The kind of cut that keeps you visible, even from across a room. So in this video, I'll share 4 haircut ideas for instant lift for women over 60, including the one I ignored for years, until it finally brought my crown back to life. Has anything like this ever happened to you? Let me know in the comments and stick around, because the one that surprised me most might surprise you too. The thing about getting older is, your hair doesn't send out a memo about the changes, it just quietly shifts. One day you're brushing it like always, and the next, it's lying there like a wet bookmark. For me, it started with the crown. Not all at once, just little signs. First, my usual round brush trick stopped working. Then the Velcro rollers, that used to give me that little bump, started leaving nothing but dents. Have you noticed your crown losing its bounce, even when you style it the same way you always have? At first, I thought maybe I was rushing or using the wrong mousse. But here's what I didn't know. Hair after 60 plays by different rules. The first rule? Each strand becomes a little finer in diameter. That doesn't always mean you're losing hair, it just means each one takes up less space. The second? Texture shifts. Some women find it gets wiry, others silky and slippery. And when that happens, all those quick fixes from the magazines in my 40s work about as well as trying to fluff up wet tissue paper. I can't tell you how many women I've met in the senior center, even in the grocery store produce aisle, who've told me the same story. Doing more, getting less. The turning point came when I stopped blaming myself and started learning why it happens. Once I understood that, I could stop blaming my blow-dryer and start asking my stylist the right questions for volume haircuts for older women with fine hair. My friend Susan came to see me a week before her granddaughter's wedding, practically glowing, and it wasn't just because she'd found the perfect teal dress. She leaned in, lowered her voice, and said, "You won't believe what my stylist just did." I thought she was exaggerating until I saw it. It was a softly layered bob for women over 60. Nothing extreme, nothing you'd notice from across a football field. But at the crown, the stylist had added just enough layering to lift the hair without it collapsing by lunchtime. The kind of volume you don't have to fight for. When I saw her at the wedding, the crown was sitting just right, not teased, not sprayed into a helmet, but naturally lifted. She told me the trick was in redistributing the weight, lightening the top without thinning it so much that it went limp. What struck me wasn't just the cut, but how she carried herself. Susan's always been self-assured, but that day there was an extra ease in her smile. She didn't fuss with her hair once during the reception, and believe me, I was watching. Weddings have a way of magnifying how we feel about ourselves. All those cameras, all those relatives you haven't seen since your hair was a different color entirely. For Susan, that subtle crown lift meant she could stop worrying about looking tired and just enjoy the day. If you've ever tried a layered bob, did it work for you? I'd love to hear in the comments. It reminded me that sometimes the most effective changes are the least flashy. A few well-placed layers can do more for confidence than any can of volumizing mousse I've ever owned. But if you want something with a bit more drama without going short, the next one might be exactly what you've been looking for. A few months back, I was at the DMV, not exactly a setting for glamour. The air was stale, the overhead lights a little too unforgiving, and everyone seemed to have the same expression: resigned patience. Then I noticed the woman ahead of me in line. Something about her posture made her stand out, but I couldn't figure out why. It wasn't until she turned slightly that I saw it the most graceful graduated bob for women over 60 I'd ever come across. The back was just short enough to lift at the crown, but the front angled gently toward her jaw, framing her face without closing it in. No choppy layers, no blunt ends, just a clean, intentional shape that gave her a kind of quiet authority. The beauty of a graduated bob is in its architecture. Those shorter layers in the back shift the weight upward, giving the crown a natural lift. Meanwhile, the longer front pieces draw attention toward the face exactly where you want it. Have you ever spotted a hairstyle in an everyday place, the grocery store, the bank, even the DMV, and thought, that's the one? Share it in the comments. I'm curious what caught your eye. The best part? You don't need a special occasion for this cut to work. You could be standing in line to renew your driver's license and still feel polished. That woman probably didn't think she was making an impression, but she reminded me that visibility isn't tied to special occasions. It's something you can choose, quietly, every day. And then there's the one I thought I'd hate until I saw it on my neighbor. My neighbor, Linda, had worn her hair long for as long as I'd known her. Not waist-length fairy tale long, but just past her shoulders, always curled under at the ends, like a well-behaved page in a library book. Then one Saturday, she walked into our block's coffee morning, and I knew something was different before I even saw her face. She'd done something I thought she'd never dare, and honestly, I wasn't sure it was her. Gone was the safe, familiar length she'd been loyal to for decades. In its place, a crown-lifted Pixie cut for women over 60 that looked like it belonged on the cover of one of those chic European-style magazines. The crown had just enough length to give her height, not spiky, not teased, but softly layered, so it caught the light. The sides tapered neatly, drawing all the focus upward. It was one of those cuts that says, yes, I meant to do this without shouting for attention. Pixies like this work best if your hair is fine to medium and you're open to regular trims every 4-6 weeks. They're not for everyone, but if you've ever wondered whether short hair could actually make you look more youthful, this is proof. I'll admit, my first reaction was amusement. But as she moved around the room, talking and laughing, I realized the cut had done something no curling iron or volumizing spray ever could. It had lifted her whole demeanor. Have you ever made a style change you swore you'd never try? Tell me in the comments. I love hearing those stories. There's a kind of thrill in seeing someone break their own rules. For Linda, it wasn't reckless, it was a release. And while I'm still not sure I'm ready to go that short, watching her made me think, boldness can be quiet, too. But the last one is my secret weapon, the one that even fooled my own sister. Last Saturday, I was weaving through the farmer's market, sidestepping a group arguing over heirloom tomatoes, when I spotted a familiar face. It was Margaret, one of my old library regulars. She used to come in every Thursday morning for large print mysteries and a quiet chat about her cat. But something was different. Her hair seemed lighter, softer, and it moved in a way I'd never seen on her before. When she turned, I realized why she'd traded her old shoulder-length bob for a layered shag haircut that looked like it had caught a breeze and decided to keep it. The choppy layers gave her silver hair a lightness I'd never noticed. No heavy, flat crown, just texture and lift all the way through, with pieces that flicked out here and there like they had their own opinions. The kind of cut that looks accidental, but took a skilled hand to get just right. We stood there by the honey stand, and she laughed when I told her it made her look like she'd just come back from somewhere breezy and glamorous. Margaret said she loved it because it hid the flat spots and gave her a bit of mischief without feeling messy. Would you ever try a layered shag? Let me know in the comments. I'm curious how bold you'd go. It reminded me that volume isn't only about height at the crown. Sometimes it's about movement, the suggestion that you're in motion, even if you're standing still, deciding between 2 jars of marmalade. Seeing her made me think. Hair can send a message louder than clothes or makeup ever could. Hers said, "I'm still curious, still playful, still here." And that's when I remembered the odd advice my stylist gave me years ago. I've thought about that day in the post office more times than I can count. For a while, the memory still made my jaw tighten the smell of that over-powdered lavender perfume, the way her voice slipped under my guard. But somewhere along the way, the sting turned into gratitude. She hadn't meant it kindly, I don't think. But she planted the seed that got me to stop blaming the weather, or my hairdryer, or bad hair days, and start thinking about how I wanted to show up in the world. Because here's the thing, a haircut isn't just decoration. It's not just about beauty, or youth, or following whatever the latest magazine says is in. For me, it's become a tool for visibility. A way of saying, without words, I'm still here, and I'd like you to look me in the eye when we speak. We don't always get big turning points. Sometimes it's just a stranger in line, a friend's wedding, or a neighbor's bold pixie that shifts the way we see ourselves. Those little nudges matter. So if your crown's been feeling flat, literally or otherwise, maybe it's time to think about what your hair is saying for you. And if you're a woman over 60 looking for haircuts that add lift and confidence, I hope today's ideas gave you something to try. Tell me in the comments, when was the last time a haircut made people notice you again? And if you enjoy these kinds of stories and tips, subscribe so you won't miss what's coming next.